Well, welcome. I'm going to be sitting down for this because I have a bunch of notes and easier to fiddle with paper sitting here. First, before we start, just a couple quick announcements of things coming up for FYI for you, on these. But on July 18th, the General Electric employees, periodically the company allows them to go out on certain volunteer projects in the community. And on July 18th, GE is going to be doing a lot of work in Chippenhook Cemetery, which is the largest of the town-owned cemeteries. And so that's real good news for us, and we very much appreciate General Electric, the generosity with that.
That was orchestrated by Tom.
Orchestrated by Tom, yes.
How many we got coming?
Anything to do with the cemeteries, Tom is in the center of.
One of many.
One of many, yes. Another item, and I don't actually have a date for this, but just telling people it's going to be occurring. The Vermont Covered Bridge Society is planning to have a celebration of sorts with the reopening of the Kingsley Bridge. The bridge is supposed to officially reopen the end of this month, the 28th, I think. And so they're working on a celebration, and I don't have any more details than that. But when we do have them, I'll be issuing something to our membership, telling them about it. And then the last announcement is when we have the townwide tag sale here in North Clarendon Village, usually the last Saturday of July. Historic Society is going to have a booth again this year. For the past couple of years we hadn't done it, but we're going to kind of resume, do that. And so if you come to the tag sale, come say hello to us. Okay, the theme of this, I called it the Unseen Cemeteries. This town has many cemeteries hidden in the woods, in fields, they're all over the place. Family cemeteries, what they were. And so we've done a lot of research into who's there, how long they've been there, and so forth. And so that was the basis for this. I also looked at all of the cemeteries that we do know, East Clarendon, Chippenhook, Jewish Cemetery, Marsh, etc. Because the cemeteries that you do know tell part of the story of these other family cemeteries, that there are connections between them. And I did come to certain overarching themes, if you will, things that I learned in doing the research. And first of all, I used Find a Grave, which anyone who does that research, it's a fabulous resource. But I've come to learn that even Find a Grave, which is pretty high quality, they have errors too. A surface, couple. And I also use, there's a series of books. This county is very fortunate in that Margaret James passed away 2 years ago. Over in the 80s and 90s, she compiled publications on all of the cemeteries in this county. This particular book is Clarendon and Shrewsbury. I had bought 8 of them, the towns we most interact with. There's another 8 books that I've got on order saying, well, when I can still get them, we'll have a complete set in our reference library. But these books, the cemeteries, every town in Rutland County is covered by a book, in her series. And they're still available at Sleeper Books in Fairhaven. Just Google that and you'll see if you want them. And I'll put these out when we're done and help yourself looking at them. One of my big observations when I was researching these is that there are very few tombstones to be had here. Tombstones with names on them that are identifiable to people prior to the mid-1780s. So the first 15 years or thereabouts that people were living in this town, they were living and dying like everyone else, but we don't have tombstones. Most of them, we don't know where they're buried. We might guess in a few cases if it's a family situation or the part of town that they lived in. but they don't have tombstones. And one of the things I came to realize is that some of the older tombstones that we have, back to the mid-1770s, and even there, people have been here for, 5, 6, 7 years, before the first tombstones are here, are that some of those the oldest tombstones may have been placed after the fact. They may have been placed years later. And in doing this, I came across a newspaper notice of a 1776 tombstone that was placed in 1808. It's not often you're going to find a written record of the placement of a tombstone. It wasn't a momentous event in most cases. But so some of the oldest tombstones may have been done in arrears. And in some of the cemeteries that we'll see in the slides, that there are very small, upright, non-naturally occurring stones, that they were stones that were placed as markers for people. There's no writing on them. If there ever was, it's gone now. Maybe someone had put initials or something to that effect, on them. But that's the earliest graves, that's what was happening, and maybe some of them were changed later for more traditional tombstones. But so there are a lot of people for the first at least 15 years that we don't know where they're buried. We can guess, but we don't know. And also, last item of the general things, that people were sometimes moved from one cemetery to another. And that perhaps still occurs. It's not a normal course of events, but when you have sort of a frontier community and someone's being placed and now there's a better cemetery elsewhere that they can be moved to, that I did come across some people being moved, which explains some of the anomalies of, wait a minute, I have tombstones or burials from 1792, but the cemetery wasn't established till 1800, and that would be people perhaps being moved after the fact. So so I'm going to try to quickly run through the cemeteries that you do know, because their stories pertain to the rest of it. The first was East Clarendon Cemetery, and the numbers that I give here, most of the time, is going to be from Find a Grave, and I'll say so if it was coming from another source. East Clarendon, 2,654 burials starting with 1792. It's an active cemetery governed by the East Clarendon Cemetery Association. This cemetery was originally a private cemetery. In 1829, it was donated to the town. In 1883, the East Clarendon Cemetery Association was formed, but the town still owned it. And in 1908, the town gave the cemetery to the Cemetery Association. There were 2 burials in 1792, and these, Elias Stork, 50 years old, and a baby, Chapman Prairie. And the cemetery wasn't really started till 1800. So these 2, either they were just placed there, and then after the fact, the owners of the property, there were 2 families, the Prairies and the Carpenters, that owned property, and they together donated about an acre to get it started. But one of the tombstones in that cemetery, this is David Billings, buried in 1859. On his tombstone it says, he came with his father and settled in Shrewsbury in November 1784 and assisted in preparing this ground for a burying place in 1800. Okay. And that says, okay, we got 2 people buried there in 1792. They may have been moved, or they were there before someone said, okay, let's make it a cemetery. But the other reason for maybe while it was moved is after 1792, the next known burial was 1803, 11 years later. And if this Mr. Billings' tombstone is saying he assisted in creating the cemetery in 1800, and it's until 1803 forward, so it sort of just tells you the timing can be awkward as to how old these cemeteries. And, East Clarendon's over across from the airport. Right next to the East Clarendon Cemetery is the Jewish cemetery. There's 212 burials starting with 1934. It's an active cemetery owned by the Rutland Jewish Center. But in, this book here, which is probably more accurate to find a grave, there are 3 burials from 1931 and 32. Though Find a Grave says 34, but we have 3 people, mother and her baby and another gentleman. Both of them happen to be Russian immigrants. But this is an active cemetery still. They've just expanded. The next one is the Smith Button Pratt Cemetery. This one is on 7B South. And this cemetery it's called the Smith Cemetery, it's called the Button Cemetery, it's called the Pratt Cemetery. And this is an active family cemetery. So people can still be buried there, but it's basically, the Smith, Button, Pratt family that are using it. It's not a town cemetery, though the town maintains it. And it was originally the Button Cemetery. And in 1922, the Button Cemetery Fund was formed by the Button, Smith, and Pratt family members. The first burials were Buttons, starting 1777 up to the present. The last burial was actually 2020 that I know of. But they began with the Button family. Up through 1842, it was primarily Buttons, and then the Smiths started being buried there. And there's actually only 6 Pratts buried there, starting in 1932. And so basically what you've got is a succession of families, which is part of the story of family cemeteries. The property changes hands, and in this case, you've got sort of a neighborhood of family members. Smiths, Buttons, Pratts. Pratts bought former Button home and farm next door to it.
The unique thing about this cemetery is you can't see it, but it extends over the hill to the back, and he started the burials there in the back and started working across the front and down the hill. And presently, we started earlier this spring, there's about 14, 16 markers that need to be straightened up, and we started that this spring up on that back part. Then it got really wet. You can see the tracks. A tree had come down, and we got it cut up, and, but it's soft. So for me to bring material, I wanted to wait until it was drier. But that's what's presently going on up there in the back part where you can't see. We had cleaned the stone wall up front, and there's another view of it.
Okay. And next is the Chippenhook Cemetery, which is also known as the West Clarendon Cemetery on Walker Mountain Road in the Chippenhook part of town. This has, Brother Smith Button had 97 burials, I forgot to say that. Chippenhook is 728 from 1791 up to the present. It's a town-owned cemetery. It is still active for those families that own plots there. The town's not selling plots in Chippenhook or any of the other town-owned cemeteries. So it's active, but limited in who can go there, only people who already own. In addition to the 728, the northwest corner of the cemetery, we're told, is where paupers were buried, and it's the part where the forest is reclaiming. There's no tombstones or markers, there. And that's not uncommon for, pauper graves. So how many people might have been buried there, who they are, we have no knowledge of.
But you are certain that there has been burials there?
It's just what we're told. We don't have, and you could do like ground penetrating radar and all that, but we don't have money for that. But towns always had paupers, towns had poor farms. We didn't have a poor farm, but the town still had paupers that the town had to support. They kick you out of town if they could find any reason to kick you out. Warned out of town was the phrase that they used. But if someone died here and the family, if they didn't have family or didn't have anyone that was going to do a proper burial, the town still buried them. And so we were told that that's where it was happening, here. And that part, there's no tombstones, the forest is growing back up. But they're obviously not amongst the 728 that are identified. And this was just originally a half acre that was deeded over to the people in society in the west part of Clarendon in 1807 by Amos Robinson, who lived right next door where the McClellan farm is now. The old house there was a Robinson home. And then it was expanded in 1865 by the then owner of that property, John Lerner, who sold the rest of that cemetery to the town for $5. But here we're seeing Amos Robinson donated or sold in 1807 to start that cemetery, but we had burials back to 1791, and it was steady. It wasn't like East Clarendon where you had 2 in 1792 and then nobody till 1803. Here it started in 1791 and it continued. And so that would basically indicate it was a private cemetery that Robinson owned. People in the neighborhood are being buried there. And then he sort of, offloaded it to the community. It's yours now, you do it.
And in this cemetery, we've got continual work going here. It's become, to some degree, I'm starting to look at this as a default cemetery. This is the old section. There's like 200 stones that need to be repaired, but we're starting to put some focus on some more of the abandoned cemeteries for projects. I've got about 8 bases ready to go for mooring. Some afternoon I'm gonna go, I'll throw them up. And this is where I've got the GE crowd coming in, working here. That is the learned plot right there. All the bars are missing except for the 2 in the front, but you can see the corner post here, corner post there. There's another one down here. But that's basically, we're working in it, but we're also starting to focus on some of the smaller projects to get some stuff done.
Okay, next is the Spafford Cemetery. That's on North Shrewsbury Road, right next to the Mormon church. So it's back off, you can't really see it from the road. So it's, there's a dirt driveway there, you go up to get to it. This is 119 known burials beginning in 1835. And like the Chippewa Cemetery, it's still active, but only for those families that already own plots there. The town's not, selling any additional ones. And this one, the first burial was Thaddeus Curtis, who lived right across the road. There's an big old white house fairly close to the road across from the Mormon church. That's where he lived, and he was the first known burial there in 1835. But it's a Spafford Cemetery. The first Spafford was not buried there till 1857. And that part of town became known as Spafford Hollow, and a lot of Spaffords there. But basically it's telling us the cemetery was not originally known as the Spafford Cemetery, just as most of the roads in town used to have a different name than they have now. Cemeteries might have as well. The first mention I can even find of the Spafford Cemetery name was in 1906. The cemetery's been there since at least 1835. I said, okay, Thaddeus Curtis was the first one there. I looked for references to Curtis Cemetery, couldn't find any at all. So what that cemetery was called in its early decades, we haven't figured that out yet. But the names changed too. Next one is the Marsh Cemetery on Middle Road here. This has 76 known burials, 75 of them from 1785 to 1894. This one is totally inactive. It's a town-owned cemetery. It's totally inactive. There aren't any burials happening there now. But like some of the others, you get a little bit of mystery of the history. Because in 1775, Silas Whitney, who owned the property, he deeded to Stephen Arnold, that's the name that's going to come up again a couple times here, an acre for burial ground. And in the deed, it says where Edward Arnold, who was Stephen's father, had been interred. That 1775, the land's being conveyed in 1775, but the first known burial that we have was 1785. Also, we found an account where Elisha Williams was buried there during the Revolutionary War. Elisha was subsequently moved to a cemetery in Rutland. Edward Arnold was subsequently moved as well to another cemetery that we'll be coming to. But if there were at least, and we don't know exactly when Elisha Williams died, but if it was during the Revolutionary War, it's probably before Silas Whitney, well, could be any time there, but before 1785 that Find a Grave is picking up on. And so it begs the question of how many people were being buried there prior to 1785 if this was being used as a burial spot as far back as 1775, 10 years earlier. And maybe those earlier burials were moved. Maybe they didn't have traditional stones that survived to the present, to know who they are. The last of the cemeteries that everyone knows pretty much is Clarendon Flats next to the town hall. It's also known as the South Flats Cemetery. It goes by either name. This has 285 burials, 282 of which were between 1785 and 1938. This one is completely inactive. Here we got a picture of our rolls in there. Town-owned. But this one we know, the burials start, the known burials start with 1785. It was established in 1786 by Elihu Smith, who lived in the White House right next to the north side of that cemetery. The town hall, the cemetery, and old White House. Elihu Smith lived there. He donated 3/4 of an acre to the town for a cemetery in 1786. And the first known burial was just a 4-year-old girl, Elizabeth Hodges. And the next burial wasn't until 1792. So that this is in the center of Clarendon Flats, basically a little village. And if it was established in 1786, you don't have another burial till 1792. It sort of begs the question, were people being buried there immediately? Was, Elizabeth Hodges, was she moved? And this starts to make more sense with the next. Now we start to move into the unseen cemeteries. And this first one here can guarantee none of us, including me, even Tom hasn't seen it. For lack of another term, I'm calling it the Lost Cemetery.
It's lost.
Yes, this cemetery, we don't know how many people were buried there. We don't know who they were. But in 1783, Stephen Arnold, the same person who had acquired the land where the Marsh Cemetery is, he transferred land to his son John, and in that 1783 transfer, it describes the cemetery that was part of the transfer, And basically, on your right is that's Middle Road, and then going up, that's Walker Mountain Road. And in the back, over here, you have the river. That the boundaries of this cemetery was the river, what constitutes Walker Mountain Road and Middle Road. And bear in mind, in the past 2+ centuries, the river could have moved some. The roads certainly are wider than they were back then. The roads could have shifted some too with time. And then extending south from those 3 sides for 2 rods, which is only 33 feet. So it was basically a long, narrow cemetery. And we know of it only for 2 reasons. We only know of this because of the 1783 deed that references the cemetery. And then in a testament to how quickly things are forgotten, history is forgotten, in 1860, someone was digging on this property and found a skeleton. And initially, there was, people thought maybe, is this a crime scene? What's this skeleton doing here? This isn't a cemetery. People had literally forgotten in that time frame that there was a cemetery there. They figured it out. So there was a cemetery. You can see the house there. That's the old Hodges Inn.
Whereabouts is it supposed to be, or supposed to have been in that corner?
No, the whole length from the river over to Middle Road.
Oh, no kidding.
Extending 33 feet.
Yeah, from the river to Middle Road, south of Walker Mountain Road, for 33 feet wide. Just a long, narrow cemetery.
Wow.
And bear in mind, the road may not be in a precise spot. It was.
The rail line probably wasn't there at the time either.
You wouldn't have had the rail line, but the boundary was the river.
So there was no markers of any kind?
No, but it's and this is why we don't know. If it was in existence in 1783, and Elihu Smith is forming the Clarendon Flat Cemetery, which is just a few hundred feet down the road.
Yeah.
In 1786, it begs the question: was young Elizabeth Hodges, who was buried in 1785, did she get moved from there over, to Lost Cemetery? I wasn't going to call it the, Arnold Cemetery, because we got one of those coming up. But, Stephen Arnold was sort of in the middle of several cemeteries here. So we don't know to the extent people got moved, or, that they just moved tombstones. But that early in the scheme, did we even have tombstones to move?
Well, the situation you're describing lends itself to all kinds of scenarios between the 2 locations. I would
Yeah.
It might be a whole bunch of people that were moved. You don't know. Yes.
That's what we don't know.
Where was the skeleton found? Remains.
On the, I don't know, we don't
No,
know
don't you know the
precisely. It's
spot?
on that property.
You don't know where
No.
Okay.
The newspaper accounts just say, on the property there.
Because chances are when they built the railroad, they probably dug nothing.
Yeah. And interestingly, where the first known burial in Clarendon Flat Cemetery was Elizabeth Hodges, her father, Silas, bought that property in 1788, 3 years after she died. And the inn there, used to be the Hodges, or the old house there had been a Hodges Inn at one time, but that was Silas's widow, built that after he died.
That railroad went in 1849,
Yeah.
that rail line.
But the fact that there's a cemetery, there's no signs of it, we have no records of it, can tell you there may have been other, family cemeteries spread here, there, that there's just no records of that, we don't know. The next cemetery, also I can guarantee none of us have ever seen it. This one is the Arnold Cemetery. And the Arnold Cemetery was, closely here. That the Arnold farm, okay, so this right here, this is Molten Ave, you know, we're up here, and Middle Road here. And so this space here was the Arnold, yeah, was the Arnold farm.
This is Middle Road,
Yeah.
and that's Bolton Avenue there.
Oh, there we are. Okay, sorry, I had that wrong.
Okay,
Oh yeah, there's Molten, Middle.
and there's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just shrink that just a little. So over here we have the brick house, real nice brick house over here in Middle Road. That was the Arnold home. And in this area over here, we had barns. Some of you may recall the last barn was torn down just a few years ago, it was falling down. We don't know the exact dimensions of the farm, so we don't know where the Arnold Cemetery was on this property. You know, if the house was here, maybe, you know, they put the cemetery somewhere in proximity to the house. We don't know. But in 1882, and there were 16 Arnolds moved from here to the Evergreen Cemetery in Rutland. And those 16 burials range from 1776 to 1879, about a century's worth. All 16 that we know of were Arnold surnamed. If there were other surnames, you know, the married daughters and their families buried on the Arnold farm, you know, we don't know. And the Evergreen Cemetery, you know, we may be able to figure out if I got up there and, you know, studied the Arnold plot to see if we have others.
No, I'm on the Evergreen board, I was just saying. Sure, one more thing to look for, never mind.
Well, no, but so we know there.
We're looking at you, Tom, for that.
But why the Arnold family moved from their family cemetery here up to Evergreen, we don't know. But, you know, because they moved to Evergreen, it was all documented.
There was a lot of people that were moved to Evergreen, they wanted the property, and they moved them from like different parts of Rutland even to the Evergreen Cemetery. Because it just made it, I guess it made it look nicer, I don't know.
Yeah. So, because we had this one, that's why I didn't call the Lost Cemetery the Arnold Cemetery. I said, okay, I can't have two of them. And on that tombstone, the town records say 1775. You know, he died. And the deed that mentions him was in 1775. And it speaks to occasionally, if families do tombstones many years later, an error can creep in. And yeah, I've seen errors before on tombstones. But the deed was 1775, referencing him already being buried. So maybe there's an error in that one.
So these are in Evergreen, right?
Evergreen.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because these tombstones could have been done years and years later. So this poor Edward, I mean, he was in the Marsh Cemetery, got moved over to the Arnold Cemetery, they got moved to the Evergreen Cemetery. But, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Hey Bob, is there any history or record of companies that actually did moving of
Personally, I don't.
I mean,
I
that had to
imagine
be-
there probably were, but
that
I
had to
don't
be
know.
an expertise, you know?
But I would think
expertise.
funeral homes.
I'll give you a couple that I know of, and the one they did in St. Johnsbury, which was horrible. In fact, UVM did a follow-up on it, where they hired the yahoos to move the bodies out of the cemetery because they wanted the parking lot where the courthouse is. What they did was they took farm harrows, went down there, ripped the coffins up, found funeral arrangements. Then they put the stones in a line at the Delwood Cemetery, or at the local cemetery. But they went back, UVM went back with a group, and they did the ground radar and excavation. They didn't move bodies, they just moved the stones.
Well,
Is that when you mentioned that
what I
guy?
call the Lost Cemetery still had that cemetery,
So-
that skeleton that
To
surfaced.
my knowledge, there was no they did one or two burials perhaps, But the big cemetery, I don't think they had any expert that did it.
The next one is the Edmonds Cemetery, where we have only 3 identified burials from 1790 to 1814, a very short time span. James Edmonds and his wife Abigail Jenks came to Clarendon in 1775, and so we have the 3, you can sort of see 3 tombstones there. But there's at least 9 additional unidentified burials here, and you can see up there those crude little stones that mark someone's grave. We don't know who they are, and in this case, I researched the family, looking to see did they have a bunch of other family members, died in those early decades, and all I found were there were several of James Edmonds and Abigail Jenks Edmonds. There were several of their grandchildren died in the 1780s and 1790s, but not 9. I think I found like 3 grandchildren. And so it begs the question, who else was being buried here? And being there, these crude stones that are indicative of very early burials, the question that arose to me is, were people being buried here before the Edmonds arrived? Someone else had the property, people were being buried, and the Edmonds came in 1775. Bear in mind, people were coming here, you had 5, 6, 7 years, of settlement before the Edmonds got here. And are there members of another family? And what adds to that is, we had an account, this had been posted on our Facebook site at one time. Betty Ewing Fox, who grew up in Chippenhook and lived there till a young adult in the 1950s, she reported that some stones that were there back in the 50s had gone missing when she came back in a subsequent visit some years later. And so there could have been even more than what we have, what we know of, but we only actually know 3 individuals, and we have 9 others unknown with those crude stones there.
And this is on the property, this is on Gravel Pit Road, the property of the Gregories. And they do a very shout out, they take very good care of this.
Yes, it's immaculate.
I spent a few minutes up there one day taking care of this crack there in that stone. But they take very good care of this.
Yeah, it's immaculate, which is more or less unique for these old family cemeteries that we have. Next is the Matson Cemetery. Here we have 8 identified burials in the 1777 to 1814 time frame, again fairly narrow stretch, plus at least 4 additional unidentified. 4 more of those crude little stones indicative of old early burials. And again, I didn't find who they might be. Missing people of the Matson family. They were in Clarendon by 1776. And again, it begs the question, did someone else start it other than the Matsons? Because we do have some very early burials that I can't account for in looking at the family. And all 8 that we do know are from the Matson family that are buried there. And that one leads into and this is on West Tinmouth Road. And it's way off, you can't see it from the road, it's way off the road, in the woods. And it needs some cleaning. And if this one were cleaned out the way the Edmonds Cemetery is, we might see that there's more than 4 unidentified burials. We might come across more, if we were able to get that cleaned. Next is the Dean Cemetery, and this is pretty much just across the road from the Matson Cemetery and down the road a little bit. And this one's in the middle of a field. That right there is the Dean Cemetery. This one has been severely degraded by farming activities over the years. We have 7 identified burials here between 1825 and 1854. All 7 are children. 4 of them were Matsons and 3 were Deans. The Matson burials were the 4 Matson children buried there are the children of 3 of the sons of the founding Matsons, Francis Matson and Mary Priest, who both died in 1812 and are buried in the Matson Cemetery. 3 of their sons have between them 4 children buried in the Dean Cemetery. 2 in 1825, 1 in 1832, 1 we don't have a date for the burial. They were all pre-Dean, so this was Matson territory. But what we do know is the Matson Cemetery, the property it's on, passed out of the Matson family in 1824. So at that point, the Matsons were no longer burying anyone in what had been their family cemetery, and they started doing burials across the road in what we now call the Dean Cemetery. All 3 of those Matson brothers subsequently moved to New York. So the Matsons ended. And then the Dean's family, there were 3 Dean children there. Those 3 children, 1842, so they came definitely after the Matsons, 1842, 1854, and again, one that we don't know when they died. But they were all the children of Joseph Dean and Fidelia Matson Dean. And she wasn't a sister of the 3 brothers that had been buried here. She was the daughter of one of them. So now she's a granddaughter of the people from the Matson Cemetery across the road. But she married a Dean, and 3 of her children are buried there. But then she and her husband and other children, they left for New York by 1857. But there is an account, and actually, in this book, telling us that Perry Dean, who died in 1820, and Huldah Round Dean, buried in 1867, were the parents of Joseph Dean, whose children are there, that they were buried there also, and they had stones there, and stones were just disappeared. But it's, of any cemetery in town, this is the most severely degraded that we still know of.
Have you gone to the town clerk office and see about if there was the deed for that particular piece of property? So those stones obviously were just tossed there, it looks like. And I've been to that, I've been there with Peter.
No, I haven't researched the deeds.
That'd be very interesting to see.
But it would appear that the, one or more of the Matson brothers, own the property.
Right.
And that my guess is, the one that owned it then sold it to his brother-in-law, Joseph Dean.
But you can't sell the cemetery.
Well, they're selling the land.
You can't sell the land. My point is, that was a cemetery. You can't, again, we talked about, you can't build on it, can't tax it, it's usually deeded out. And my guess is, if you look at the records, it'll have the dimensions and where that cemetery was.
Well, we haven't done that yet, but, but it was basically, that land was being farmed and the cemetery was in the way.
Yep.
Next is Kavanaugh Briggs. Now we're over on East Street. And this is on this cemetery is on the Alderman estate. You can't see it from the road. It's, way back. Here we have 31 identified burials, 27 of them between 1777 and 1876. And here, the property had belonged to Daniel Briggs and his wife Elizabeth Spencer Briggs, who were in Clarendon by 1777, when their youngest daughter, Mercy, was born, and that same year, their 1-year-old daughter, Dora, died. Mercy, in turn, married Martin Kavanaugh, and another of their daughters, Amy, married Caleb Congdon, who lived across the road from them. so it was the Briggs family married into the Kavanaugh. This cemetery is called Briggs Cemetery, it's called Kavanaugh, it's called both. The first burials, of course, and Dora Briggs in 1777. But of the 29 known burials there, 24 were part of this aggregate Briggs Kavanaugh Compton family, all related. But this cemetery has a lot of unidentified, similar to the others, that there's another section, we have this section with all the tombstones and sort of coming this way. This cemetery has not been, here it looks fairly clean, but the old, the little upright, non-naturally occurring stones, there's a bunch of them that are little poking out of the ground. Some of them we know will be underground still. So we don't know how many unidentified burials, are here, but it could be quite a few, in this cemetery. And again, we don't know who they are, we don't know when they were buried. And indicative of, the early years, of settlement. And does any of our pictures show that one? They're not easy to see. Yeah, the unidentified people.
No.
But you can look, they're hardly visible because they haven't been maintained or brought to the surface.
As much as you see of this cemetery, there's an equal portion behind you. And that's the portion it's talking about. You've got all these little upright stones, they're just right on the line. Every 6 feet there's a stone upright. So you know that there was burials back there. This is a Condon stone. This is a Briggs, my wife. And this is a Condon stone, which I told Ed would be repaired this year. We'll fix that. But this is on the Alderman property. Once again, kudos to Phil and his wife. They've maintained it, they keep it mowed, they put the fence around it. And he's reached out to us, and we will be working there this straightening, taking these linears out, fixing them up, fixing the stone.
And surfacing these the unknowns.
Right.
Which right now you can't see so well. If you go there, you can barely see. You just see little signs of them.
It's kind of like this stone right here,
Yeah.
except it's in this, you see this fence continues up and it comes across right there. And you just see a line of these little stones, an inch and a half above the ground. They just didn't actually fall that way. They replaced that.
Yeah, they're not naturally occurring stones. But the next cemetery, Haven Hill, which is also known as Prairie Walker Cemetery, is just down the road from here, from this cemetery, on Old Orchard Place, which is a new road, subdivision with 3 houses in it. And here, we did do work a couple years ago. You're seeing these little crude stones that we did surface them, and we get them standing up again. We don't know who they are. We don't know when they were buried, but we know people were buried there. In this cemetery, there's only 6 identified burials. 5 of them are from 1779 to 1798, a fairly narrow window. And there's at least 32 of these unknown burials here, these little stones. And it's possible, there could be a few more that have gone missing, but there's at least 32. So this is a very old cemetery.
Grandmother right there.
Of the 6 that we know, one is a fairly modern one that was placed there by the property owner. But the 5 old ones, basically, there's a family of Ichabod Walker and his wife Abigail, I don't know how to pronounce it, Logia. They were in Clarendon by 1772. And 4 of the 5 known burials were the wife, Abigail, and 3 of her children that are buried there. They all got stones with names on them. Her husband, Ichabod, is not buried there because he subsequently relocated to New York. This in the air, a lot of people relocated to New York, better land. And this, I have not found a connection between the Ichabod Walker family and what I call the Clarendon, the Chippenhook Walkers, in the Chippenhook part of town where we had a lot of walkers, there. And if they're related, I hadn't found a connection between the Lewis Walker extended clan and this Ichabod Walker. The other one, after the 4 Walkers that we know, was Dorothy Randall Crary. I could not find a connection between her and the Walker, a relationship, her being a relative of the Walkers. It's always possible she was a cousin somewhere, or she could have just been a friend, friend and neighbor, being buried in the same place. Dorothy Crary's husband, Ezra, is buried in the East Clarendon Cemetery with his second wife. So he's not there. So we only know 5 old ones, and a whole lot of people who don't even know who they are.
This is a grandmother of you, right?
Yeah, right to the 5th.
So where is that cemetery? I didn't.
That's off of Old Orchard Place, which is a new street, has like only 3 houses on it. New street a few years ago, off of East Street. You go up Bump Road and turn right. And
Through the orchard.
It's the Haven Hill Orchard, I think.
Yeah.
it's the old Haven Hill Orchard property. But you turn right, go up Bump Road, turn right, and it's just up there a little bit on your left. You can't miss it because of, brand new houses there.
When I first saw this was John Romano had reached out to us, and it was just full of brush. They couldn't see the stones. The Walker one was broke and down, but and this one was broken down. He's agreed to, once we did the work 3 or 4 times during the summer, send his mowing crew down and weed whack the stuff and keep the stuff down. So, and I've gone up to kind of make sure if I did the work, I was going to make sure that I was getting done.
And so when we finish over at Kavanaugh Briggs Cemetery, maybe similar to this, those old unidentified soils, the stones will be more visible, and the traditional stones will be in better shape than they are now. Okay, next is we're fast forwarding in time to the Chapman Cemetery. There's only 2 burials in Chapman. Leon Chapman in 1960 and his wife Elizabeth Rowell Chapman in 1954. And the accounts of this are that, the graves were carved out of rock there. And at the time, the Chapman farm was 2,000 acres. And the Chapmans had been there since 1772. So after almost 2 centuries of the family being there, probably felt like a safe bet of putting, creating a little cemetery, for them. Most of the Chapman land is gone. There's only small parts left, which does not include the Chapman house or this, where the cemetery is. That's passed out of the family, now. This one's really visually a very neat cemetery. Just 2 people. What they did there.
Interesting thing.
And this is on Route 133. Go up. After you Walker Mountain Road intersects with 133, just up the road a little bit on the left, there's an old brick house that, with the Chapman home, and it's up on the hill behind that house.
There was a lot of discussion at the time that this occurred in terms of whether or not it should be allowed and all this kind of thing. As a kid, I remember lots of discussion about it.
Well, now as you'll see, people just do it.
Yeah.
We'll come to a couple of those. Next is the Tubbs Cemetery. This is on East Timoth Road, and this is, without any doubt, or it was probably the finest quality cemetery in this town. There was nothing like it. There appeared to be 16 burials, 14 of which are identified. They were between 1837 and 1904. And what you have here is, it's all white marble surrounding a cluster of graves. And in the center, you sort of see in the background, over here, you know, that in the center of it, it looks like there was an underground wall covered with these big slabs of marble that have since fallen in. You know, and that's what you're seeing, there are those slabs, you know, in the ground. But you have, you know, the big walls surrounding it, and then you go in and you have a, you know, wrought iron gate or fence around where the slabs were for the underground wall. But outside of that, you have another wrought iron gate, you know, making a big square with it, and you have several, you know, you have more monuments and tombstones. It's almost more or less in ruins at this point, but it was, you can tell, someone, we know who it was, Isaac Tubbs spent a whole lot of money, you know, building this. You know, one side of, you know, the marble wall, one side is already collapsed, another side is, you know, sort of leaning like this, so it's just a matter of frost going deep enough one winter and that wall's coming down. The arch in front is, surprisingly, that's still intact. You can sort of see arch there. That's the entrance. And the arch is dated 1848. So this structure basically was built 1848. We have burials back to 1837. So they already did it, and then they just sort of severely upgraded the whole thing. You know, before it was built in 1848, you know, Isaac Tubbs' son Isaac, you know, a toddler, was buried in 1837, and his first wife Martha was buried there in 1840, and then he upgraded, you know, this whole thing in 1848. And then, you know, subsequently, Isaac's second wife Fanny was buried there in 1853. His third wife Viola was buried there in 1861. A sister of his and her husband, another son and his wife, and various grandchildren and spouses. So it's everyone buried there was part of the Tubbs family. There weren't any others in it, but you can see on the right-hand side that wall is, you know, coming off, and that's going to come tumbling down. But there's probably nothing like this in the town of Clarendon, but pretty much it's in ruins.
You've got to remember, at one time, this was right out in the open. I mean, majority of Vermont was clear cut, sheep and everything. This was right out in the open.
At one time back then, you could have seen this from East Timoth Road. Now you can't, you know, it's in the woods, the forest has grown up.
This is a driveway up to a house.
There's no Tubbs left, I'm assuming.
Pardon?
No Tubbs left.
Supposedly, that family won the lottery. That's where they got the money to do that.
Well,
I don't know where that's historically said, but that's what the rumor mill said.
well, for a cemetery that, you know, when he built this, that, you know, two people, and he was preparing it for, you know, the future here, he spent that winnings, if he did. You know, there's nothing like this in town. It's just sad to see it in ruins.
You see this much marble, and you think of Redfield Packard, this burial tomb in
Yeah.
That was supposedly a mausoleum. They described it that way. Now, I don't know if that meant it was covered with a wooden structure over the top.
There's no indication.
There's no evidence of that.
No evidence of that. You know, you had your outer wrought iron gate, which is pretty high quality in of itself. You know, then you have your marble wall, and then you have a second iron fencing around what appeared to be, there was an underground wall that they covered with these large marble slabs. And that's probably why they were using the word mausoleum.
Yeah.
You know, by whatever definition, but next is the Potter Cemetery. This is also on East Timoth Road, just down the road from the Tubb Cemetery. This one has just 5 burials from 1842 to 1892, and it's a single family unit. You know, it's William Potter, his wife Huldah Dean, you know, who was one of the daughters of the Deans that were burying children over on West Timoth Road, and 3 of their children that died at 11 months, not quite 3, and 11 years old. So just this one nuclear family buried in there. And since these pictures have been taken, that cemetery was all cleaned out very nicely. That cemetery is in very good condition. I was going to take new pictures of it, but the cemetery may be in great condition, but there were way too many sticker bushes between Dave's driveway or the road and physically getting there. You know, but the cemetery is all cleaned up and that one's in great conditions. The next one we have is the Waite Cemetery, which is right across in the fields here. It is Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Waite, who was wounded in a skirmish by Lake Champlain, 1776. He lived in New Hampshire. Some of his troops were helping to bring him back to his home in New Hampshire. They stopped for what they call the fort here in Clarendon to rest apparently, and he died here. And so he was buried here. So one of the most famous people in Clarendon, that his entire association here was he died. He never lived here, but he got buried here, and he was quite an acclaimed person. And the fort reference is over here in the village, sort of like behind the wall of trees that you see across the road here, was a rise there. Pleasant Street extension goes up. There's like 3 houses there now, and it wasn't a fort in the way most people think of fort. We don't know what it was, but it could have been a blockhouse, or it could have been just a structure with a stockade fence around it. Because the real fort was up in Rutland, not here. But they called it a fort, so it was fenced in, or it was a blockade house of some sort, and that's where they were stopping on the way he died here. But this one, beautiful monument over here, 1776. This is the one, I found the newspaper account, 4th of July, 1808. The monument was placed and they had a ceremony, honoring him. And so here it was, many years later, 32 years after he died, the monument was going in. And that's why I said some of our early, the relative handful of early, mid-70s, 70s monuments, they might have been placed years later by the family, but typically you're not going to have it because Colonel Waite was, an esteemed figure. It got a newspaper article telling us 1808 that it was placed.
And that monument, I got a call years ago on it because somebody in the town paid to have the monument cleaned. And they came in with a belt sander to clean the monument. So just bear in mind that he hires people, you don't know what they're doing, but that's one I remember so well because of how famous it was, and to have somebody with a belt sander to clean the front of the stone.
and the stone still reflects, you know, the gouging, the digging and the belting. This is a project that's going to be taken care of hopefully in the next couple, 3 weeks. The stone here is roughly 4.5 feet long, and it's sunk. It doesn't show it completely. I've cut this back, trimmed, because the ground kind of keeps creeping in. But it's about 4 or 5 inches down below the grade of the ground. And so I've enlisted the aid of Tom and some other people, and what we intend on doing, we're waiting for Cash to mow his field because I don't want to knock down his hay. But we're going to dig around, we're going to lift that stone, put material, shore pack underneath the stone, and then reset the stone so it's more grade. Right now, water sits on it. And the ground just completely, if I had cut it back, would have just completely eventually covered it. So that's the project. The next 2 or 3 weeks that'll be taken care of, I trust.
Okay. Next one is the Austin Cemetery. This is relatively new cemetery. This one is not in find a grave, by the way. This is up on Waterline Road, the very northern part of Waterline Road in Clarendon. There are just 4 burials here. You know, Paul Austin in 1985, his wife Luella in 2005, their daughter Ethel Bushy 1980, and her son Michael Bushy in 1998. And you know, this one of them, I think it's Ethel Bushy. You see that big boulder in the background? You know, she has a plaque on that big boulder. Interestingly, sits outside the fence, you know, of it. You know, so a small cemetery, you know, on Austin family property.
Could you go back to that first slide? Right there. Just as a side note, Bob, on the right-hand side of that barn has fallen down. No longer exists.
It's fallen down?
It's gone.
Yeah.
I know, we don't have photos of that barn.
Well, you got one.
We've got one right there.
Yeah. We try to, you know, there are many old barns in town. We got photographed just to create a record of them, but we haven't gotten all of them. So, you got pictures of your old barn, we're glad to see them. And so, yeah, the Austin Cemetery. And next is another new cemetery, actually the newest cemetery in town, Decato Cemetery. This is on Gravel Pit Road, and there's just 2 burials at present. You know, Aaron Decato in 2007 and his father Alan in 2023. And so Aaron has, you know, a plaque on just a big stone. Alan, his father, is going to have a big stone. They're just waiting for the plaque to arrive. When the plaque arrives, the plaque will be mounted on this stone. And there's a 3rd stone placed in there that there's going to be a burial there as well. You know, another family member that's actually already deceased is going to be buried here, and that one will get a plaque as well. So they're just using you know, very large stones, and they're actually, this cemetery right now is small, very small, but they're planning on expanding the cemetery to allow room for future generations of the family to be buried there. And so, which is why George find interesting if the Chapmans, but you're back in 1954 when that started, so it's a different world of needing permission, and now, these, it just gets done.
Yes, done.
The last one we have, one of my more favorite cemeteries here, the Parker Cemetery. And this is in the northeast corner of town, sort of in the woods off of Cold River Road, just before you enter Rutland Town. You're going back on the Nicky property, where, you've got
Grass cutters.
Yeah.
It took us 2 attempts to find this when we went.
It's pretty well overgrown, yes.
Well, we didn't know where we were looking for it.
We had an idea. Someone told me they could see it from the road, so we said, we went that direction.
That person was confused, so we don't listen to him.
Who's this?
We don't know.
Oh,
So did they have it blocked off?
No, it is not blocked off. I've reached out to Kevin Aldicki, who owns Earth Waste. When I spoke to the woman at Earth Waste last week, she appeared to be very interested, as someone was going to take some interest in the cemetery, but Aldicki own it, and I have not heard back from them yet, but
There is a farm gate that, in theory, could be closed and locked,
Right.
keep people out.
Again, the law is, they don't own the cemetery. and
Right.
They have to provide access, and if they don't provide access, and you go the legal route, saying, well, it's convenient for both parties, but it has to be access around.
But when we went there, it wasn't, gated, but there is a gate there that someone could.
I've never been there, I've always heard about
right.
where it
Well,
is.
we'll have to go out there, Tom, because the issue is, the day we went, it was on a whim. We went, we're gonna find this. The second day was another whim because we failed the first day. But we chose the route of, well, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to beg for it.
Absolutely.
And so we decided to go. So we got there, we found this, and I tell Bob, I look at that, and I think of one of those movies where you're sitting out in the middle of the woods, but all of a sudden the leaves are being disturbed as it comes down at you. You're out there in the woods. It's quite impressive. This lane, this old road, or whatever it is that goes up.
There's an old roadway running along the, edge of it.
And this is the wall on the south end.
You know, the 1869 map the other night, and down on the west side of the river, there was the turning shops, they call them, but there was actually a turning shop that shows up almost right near the town line, that this road may have been like an industrial kind of lane to get to that turning shop.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, you had the Parker Farm, was there. And, the barns, there's still some real nice barns there that I did get photos of, that are.
We turned it into
Yeah.
killing 2 birds with one
Yeah,
stone.
got it. How far down the road is it from the main drag?
Well, it's probably several hundred yards.
That's it, okay.
And then you walk into the woods. The first time we walked in a more northern direction,
Okay,
through a swamp
okay.
and all kinds of
But
thorny
it's not
bushes.
that, you can see the barns if you sort of turn off Cold River Road there, the entrance. You can see the barns in the distance. It's not that far from the barns.
Yeah.
I always heard it was up there, I just never
Yeah.
seen it.
Yeah, you go up to the barn and there's, a road that goes to the left behind the barns and another road that forks off to the right. And the road to the right will get you there, but you gotta, even then, you're not going to necessarily see it.
So this is the south wall, and they put a lot of effort in this. Those are large tablet stones sitting on top, all the way around. This is the west wall, and you can see the steps. There's a better picture of the steps. And those are large tablet stones sitting on top of this wall. So it appears they either dug the bank out and put the wall in, or they built the wall and filled.
Yeah, we have 18 identified burials here, 1837 to 1938, so centuries worth. And this one is a little bit mysterious. By the way, Find a Grave says there's 19, but as I was studying who the people were that were buried there, as soon as I saw the photograph for the tombstone for Nathan Doolittle, that Find a Grave says is buried there, it's like, that tombstone is not in this cemetery. Well, Nathan Doolittle, that is recorded in Find a Grave, is here. He's buried in the Packer Cemetery in Mount Holly. So when someone was doing a Find a Grave entry, they typed Packer instead of Parker, and he ended up here. And I, confirmed it through, these books.
Just real quick. This is the roadway we were looking at. This is that south wall, and that's the roadway.
Awful big trees in that one.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
they probably weren't there when they put
No.
the cemetery in.
No,
Yeah.
And where is that again?
Off Cold River Road,
Off Cold
Where?
River Road.
where the El Nicky pit is, up on that property.
Just before you enter Rutland Town.
Yeah,
Just
It's
before
back, you see barns,
With a little,
you see
Right.
barns in the back,
before the
way off the road.
there's a building that's been torn down that nobody's taken care of, that right next to that, right that road.
Yeah, pretty much.
What's that?
That building that's right next to the,
That's no longer there.
yeah, well, it's still, pile.
No, Daniels?
The building, the house, the
Yeah.
building is down,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's on the other side of the bridge.
right,
Yeah.
This is on,
right.
this is on the north side of the bridge.
So this cemetery would have been, this is on the Parker farm, would have been begun by Benjamin Parker and his wife Patty Wyman Parker. Benjamin died in 1868, Patty in 1877. But what's interesting here is only 6 of the 18 burials were part of the Parker family. The first burial in 1837 was the wife of Benjamin and Patty's son Israel, and Israel himself 2 years later was the second burial in 1839. The last 2 Parkers on this property were sisters. Abigail died in 1895, her sister Sarah died in 1896. They were both in their 70s at that point. They lived their entire life on that farm, in the house. The house is gone. Their entire life, they are not recorded as being buried here, and I can't find them as recorded being buried anywhere. I can't imagine they've spent their entire life on this farm, in that house, that they're not buried here. And all I can think is they were the last of the Parker farm, or Parker family on this property. And when they died, nobody bothered giving them tombstones. That's my best guess for them. Maybe if this gets cleaned up, we'll find a couple tombstones down on the ground, for, Abigail and Sarah, but maybe not.
So that's going to be the first step of the process. I was surprised that there's this little undergrowth in this cemetery. Like when I hit Haven Hill, I was waist high and pucker brush and stuff like this. I'm surprised, and I think it's because the canopy, the trees, the light doesn't get to the ground. So the first step is going to be weed whack all this stuff down, get rid of the limbs, and then rake. Get the leaves, a good portion of the leaves off to see, because there are 2 or 3 flat stones that are down.
And you can have stones that are down that are completely covered that we haven't seen.
Over time, the ground and the grass itself will just keep creeping over.
But you
That's
clean
what
the
happened
surface,
here.
you clean the surface and that stuff starts to come back.
Things-
The last 2 burials here were in 1938, and that was Isaac Balch and his wife Marie Wilmot Balch. They were the then owners of the property. They bought it in 1913. And so those were the last burials. So 6 Parkers, the 2 Balches you see here. The other 10 burials, I was not able to find a connection to either the Parker or the Balch families.
What are the other names?
They were Spaffords, Wilmoth, Bixby, and Flanagan. And the Wilmoth, by the way, I mean, Mrs. Balch, her maiden name was Wilmoth, but they, you know, again, they didn't buy it until 1913. The Wilmoth that's buried there was Sarah Het Wilmoth, who was a 1-year-old who was buried in 1848. So 65 years before her, whatever distant relative even owned the property.
But Stafford Cemetery is right up around the corner.
Yeah, you can throw a rock, you know,
Yeah.
up on the.
But we have
And so Balch is buried in that
Yeah.
cemetery, the
Yeah.
Spafford Cemetery.
Yeah.
But so you have 6 Parkers who owned it, 2 Balches who owned it, but then the other 10 are Spafford, Wilmoth, Bixby, and Flanagan, the other 10. And I can't see that they were related to, you know, and that would be, if they were buried all contemporaneous with the Parker burials. And so I'm left with the questions, were they just friends of the Parkers? Sure, you can use our cemetery. Were the Parkers selling plots to other people to offset the cost for building this rather, what was once a very nice cemetery? You know, we don't know, you know, the answer to that. But I find it kind of interesting because most family cemeteries, the majority is the family. And occasionally you may have a couple others in there.
We don't know how many stones we have like this, which is, this stone is down, it's flat, and,
But right here, the majority are part of the Parker family that were being buried while the Parkers owned the farm.
Well, you know, it wouldn't be out of the realm of reason that, you know, for money changing hands, we got a place to put somebody.
Yeah, but they could have been selling plots. This could have been on its way to being another town cemetery,
You don't know.
you know, along the way instead of just a family operation.
The other thing to consider in those time periods, I mean, if neighbors are getting along, there's a constant community helping back and forth and, you know, shake your hand and here's a place to put your uncle or whatever.
It's just of all the family cemeteries, this one is the only one with the majority not being part of the family.
It is curious.
You know, because, you know, in each case I was looking at who are the other people, and that's how I, you know,
And that's-
saw this Nathan Doolittle isn't even buried there.
And that later stone is pretty heavy, so they must have had access to it somehow back in the day.
right,
Not that far long ago.
Yeah.
86 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. But see, this, as this one shows, I caught a picture of a specter in the cemetery.
It's haunted.
Yeah.
You never know where you're
What
gonna
you
find
can
one
see,
in the woods.
all, in this part of the wall is damaged, you can see the tap, that's the part of the top of the wall.
That one doesn't even have a head.
Right.
That was
It
new.
looks like our Sleepy Hollow.
Sorry?
So the town's taking over this one, or it's just a project for the cemetery commissioners?
The town's not taking it over. But it's gonna be a project, and like I said, reaching out to El Nicky's. This is gonna be a project, you know, there's not a lot of stones. There's not a lot of stones I have to work on. But this stone is probably about 700 pounds.
Yeah.
So to be able to get that stone you're not gonna get any equipment in there to do it. So it's gonna be a lot of work, you know, bars, getting it up, the base is kind of wonky. We can do it,
My back hurts.
yeah, but,
Yeah, I mean, you saw the cemetery is sitting up high, like on a knoll, and you have steps going up to it. That's why there's not gonna be any equipment in there.
so it's gonna be something where, you know, a lot of
Well,
manpower, a lot of
there in the
work.
first place.
Pardon?
They had to get the stones there at some point.
At one time they
They
did,
did.
right?
Pony
Yeah.
Tower.
No,
Right,
that
there's
was
no
a
way to
big,
go to the tractor up there now.
no, somebody brought it, somebody had a foot that they brought it up with the
Yeah.
stones.
Uh,
Absolutely.
So, but it's not, it is doable. It's just going to take some planning. The first stage is going to clean this all off and just see what we've got to do. To stand out there is something. To be out there, to see this, and look at it, and it's peaceful and it's quiet, and
This was a very high quality cemetery, in its day. And sadly, it's deteriorating.
Bob, are there any newspaper articles from the 30s where it talks about these people, an obituary, and then referencing where they were buried?
Yeah, in error, in the 1900s, latter 1800s, they're usually telling you where they were buried, naming the cemetery. Before that, more often than not, they're just saying they died. Even if you had a really flowery write-up, they may say, where you're going to be interred. But often they didn't. That's what I did on the Spafford Cemetery. I was trying to figure out what was the name of this cemetery. And before it became Spafford, because come 1906, there were everyone being buried at Spafford Cemetery. But before that, I wasn't finding a name. If it was there for at least a generation before you had the first Spafford, in it, it's like, okay, what were they calling it? But the old newspapers, you typically didn't use a name.
But the last burial was the 30s?
38.
38, right there, that's
Yeah.
one right there.
Yeah, by then, yes, it almost always told you, where they were being buried.
Well, half the death certificate will say that it was burial permit.
Not Clarendon.
Even in Clarendon, they had their burial permit in the 30s, yes.
Oh, in the 30s.
Even in Clarendon.
Some of those trees
So,
could have been there in 1938, I would guess.
Oh, I imagine some of the trees were.
yeah.
And so what I'm wondering about is, oxen were still used at that time, with these kind of sled with metal on the bottom and dragging over the ground.
These two stones right here are,
There's a couple of replacement stones.
there they are again, but they were burials in 1843, but that's a fairly
Yeah, it's
newer
not.
stone.
If I were in charge of a cemetery, I wouldn't want oxen wandering between the tombstones.
Probably not.
They're not real precise animals.
The
So
question is, how did you get them there?
Well, that we don't know. But that's all I had. For questions, people are free to look at, these if they want. There's Clarendon, Shrewsbury, Wallingford, Mount Holly, Pittsburgh, Proctor, Danby, Mount Tabor, Middletown Springs, Ira, Timoth, West Rutland, and Rutland.
I worked with her in Chippenham on those days.
Oh, Margaret, yeah, right, you did.
Back a long time ago.
Yeah, so,
And the ones there in
but we're gonna end up with a complete set at the county.
Yeah.
I've got the rest on order for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.